Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the MMA Plug presented to you by Mile High Sports. We are coming to you live from the number 38 presented to you by Volo here today. Guys, check out these awesome new drops from the magazines here over at Mile High Sports. These are so cool. Some Broncos drops over here. You've got Bo Nix, you've got PS2. That's incredible artwork. I mean, as the Broncos fan in full swing of the NFL kicking off this first week, that's something you got to add to the collection right there. All across the board, though, make sure that you hit that like, share, and subscribe button for any site possible, socials, the online channels, podcast network, YouTube, everything from Mile High Sports Network. You've got the CU Buffs who bounced back this last week with a win over Delaware, but it does seem like there's a bit of a quarterback controversy brewing over there in Boulder. So keep it locked for those guys with more updates on that QB1 situation going on up there with Coach Prime and the boys. You have, as mentioned, the NFL in full swing now of the regular season. The Broncos did not get off to the fast start that they were hoping to in week one against the Tennessee Titans, especially on the offensive side. Defense played phenomenal, but as the old adage in sports and in competition goes, it's always better to learn off of a win. This week, the Broncos are going to be on the road. It's a 2:00 start time. They're facing the Indianapolis Colts and a seemingly rejuvenated Daniel Jones, the one-time 6th overall pick. He was out there looking like a young Peyton in Indianapolis last week for the Colts. So we'll see how that goes this week. Hopefully the defense is back in full swing and we are a little bit more in sync offensively. But again, keep it locked for all of the updates as we go into game day for the Broncos this weekend. If you check out Cody Rourke's social media, I think that he's producing some incredible Broncos related content right now and as a part of the Mile High Sports Network. And the segment that he does on his Instagram with his wife, the What the Football, every week, it's for those of you who don't know, just give you a quick 30,000 foot rundown. And sorry if I'm butchering the description at all, Cody, but it's essentially he watches and he covers the game for a living, right? But his wife has taken a liking to football ever since they've been together, but doesn't really know much about the game. So she has a bunch of questions. You know, fellas, I mean, all of us can relate. Anytime you're watching a show, movie, game, whatever with your girl, like, you know how the questions flow. But rather than him being interrupted in the process of trying to watch the game as a professional and be able to have his analysis and be able to keep up with his updates as a journalist and a professional, she writes these questions down, and then that's a social media content or a video content segment that they do every week where he answers those questions that she writes down from throughout the game. And I mean, I've watched every single week and they're hilarious. They just keep on getting better and better. So Cody and the missus, keep up the great work. You also have NHL and NBA offseason talk just a few weeks from that season into effect there. You have the Rockies, who are sitting at a ripe 40-105. For those keeping track at home from the last time that we talked to you last week, that is another week of them going 1-5. I've seen a few sell shirts in the likeness of the Rockies, like font or typeface that have been floating around out here in the area. Even as out of touch as the Monforts have historically been, they've got to be feeling the heat a little bit at this point. I mean, they have to be feeling some of this growing unrest amongst their fan base. All that to be said, make sure that you check out the Mile High Sports Network wherever it is possible and hit that like, share, and subscribe. Greatly appreciate your support along that front. Move it along to the Colorado Rundown. If you have the opportunity, guys, to buy tickets from the fighters or the athletes competing on these shows, please do so, whether it's paper ticket or using the online point of sale system and hitting that promo code with them to get them credit for that commission. That is something that helps build their platform and allows for them to leverage some future opportunities. Your support with them greatly has benefited there. We have a couple of events coming up in the next at the end of the month here. You have a fight night for Sparta going down on September 27th, down in Castle Rock. Oscar Herrera going to be back on that card. He just had a win on their card a couple of weeks ago. So a very quick turnaround for the moisturizer. He's going to be back in the fold, taking on Jimmy Natividad. You have the Colorado Jiu-Jitsu Club returning to action at the Colorado Tattoo Convention. We're going to have a little bit more promo stuff on that in the weeks to come. You have friend of the program, Josh the Big Yin's friend. He's going to be on the card. A lot of high-level grapplers going to be in the mix there for that tattoo convention show. And guys, the really cool thing about this event is you can buy tickets for the event on Saturday itself, or there's an option with the partnership that CJJC has with the Colorado Tattoo Convention. If you wanted to be able to have access to the whole weekend worth of events that they have at the expo, you can do so for just a couple of bucks more through that online point of sale system. That's a great weekend worth of events in terms of they have little like shows. I know a couple of years ago, I'm not sure what the entire rundown is for this year, but in the past they've had like lowrider shows, little talent shows, fashion shows, things of that nature, along with naturally just booth upon booth upon booth of highly skilled and talented tattoo artists out there. And you get to see some scraps in the mix. Friday, there's going to be weigh-ins that are happening on the main stage at the tattoo convention as well. So check that out at the National Western Stock Show, and that's going to be on the weekend of September 27th. The following weekend, down at the Colorado Springs City Hub, you have Battle MMA Championships. That is October 4th, like we say, Southern Colorado. You're going to have a good swing of some of the fighters from down in that footprint competing. Good opportunity to go out there and show some support for some local talent out there. The following weekend, you have two events. It's going to be a back-to-back thing. You have a Friday show for MMA going down at the Stampede. That's going to be Colorado Combat Club. That's a show where, I mean, when you look at the rundown and you look at some of the names that we're going to have on that show for a local card, the name value and the value that you're going to get as a fan for your purchase, whether it's the pay-per-view, the ticket, whatever it may be, you're not going to find anything better on the local side of things. I promise you. You have a main event with Bellator vet Justin J. Train Gonzalez. You have him taking on another Bellator vet in Edwin Chavez. You have a co-main event of two of the brightest rising prospects in the featherweight division that Colorado has to offer in Brandon Waters taking on Connor Leonard, Both of those guys are ready to bring the heat. They want to stand and they want to swing. Somebody is going to fall in that fight. They both have a great deal of confidence about their capabilities, and they both want to put each other on a highlight reel. So that is a fight that, like I say, that one alone right there, if you take away those highly skilled vets, that could absolutely be a main event of any sort of local level card. Then you've got Miguel Barrientos back on the card, a guy who has won hardware across pretty much every Colorado promotion that you can. You have a high-level kickboxing match or a pro kickboxing match, Muay Thai match out there. You're going to have Alex Gutierrez taking on Mike Schultz. You have a title fight between Isaiah Wright and Jacob Spino. This, I'm promising you guys, this is going to be a show that you cannot miss on October 10th. The following day, there's 5280 Muay Thai that's going down at the Stampede as well. That's a Muay Thai matinee. Check that out in the afternoon. You'll be out of there in time to be able to handle all of your nighttime festivities. And then rounding out the month, there's going to be the private show by our boy Ron Kruk, the MMA Hem show on October 24th. That wraps up the Colorado Rundown. Again, if you have the chance to get tickets from any of the athletes directly, please do. That is something that definitely benefits them, and it's also going to save you a couple of bucks in the process. If you're buying from the online point-of-sale systems, you're going to have to deal with paying whatever the taxes, the online fees, blah, 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 all of that. If you're getting them from the athletes directly, you don't have to pay the rest of that. That $40 that you see is the $40 that you're paying. Little bit is a little bit. I get how that goes as far as saving. Moving along to the weekend recap. Starting it off, Want to give a shout out to Natalie Salcido of Colorado Springs. She got her debut victory under the One Championship banner. She's a black belt herself. She won by triangle Americana, so that's a very big victory for somebody stateside going over there and fighting for one championship and to go and get a finish right away. So congratulations to you, Natalie. Then we're going to talk about the UFC Paris card. Now, I know that some people out there are saying that Kyle Bahallo got fraud checked, but I have a really hard time dealing with that narrative that he got fraud checked. And let me tell you why. Nasruddin Imavov is the real deal. And I don't think that it's necessarily that Kyle is not a good fighter. Kyle is a very talented and skilled fighter. I just think that right now you're talking about two guys who are both on the ascent. Kyle hadn't lost in 10 years. I mean, it's not to say that he was due for a loss by any means, because that's never something really that you can say. But at the same time, are there some opportunities in his game? Absolutely. And I think that gives him an opportunity to potentially have that proverbial slingshot effect, where this setback allows for him to have a growth that he might not have experienced otherwise. You know, it's always a hard concept to wrap your head around, but it is something that, you know, if you've been around the game for long enough, you do understand exactly what I'm talking about there. Now, Nasruddin Imavov, though, that guy has been somebody who has been thought of as being one of the one of the bright prospects, or one of the silent assassin guys that has been creeping up the rankings throughout the years. Let's not forget who he literally just finished in his last fight. He finished the former champion and arguably the second greatest champion that the division has ever had to offer in the last stylebender, Israel Adesanya. So for Kyle to go out there and to go the distance with him, I don't believe that means that he got fraud checked. Now, if he went out there and he got dog walked, or just got completely sparked and humiliated in the process, well, then, yeah, I would offer you that is something that I could concede to, as far as saying that he got fraud checked. But he got beat. Yes, he didn't get finished, and it was still competitive, even though it was definitely no question that Nasruddin won. People are also trying to point to Kyle Bahallo cutting weight just roughly about a month ago for being back up for that Dricus du Plessis and Khamzat Chimaev fight in Chicago. They're trying to say that, his dual weight cuts is an excuse for the poor performance, and that, he was heavy in the legs because he cut weight twice in a few weeks' time. There might be a little bit to that, and I'm not trying to discredit the actual science of the multiple weight cuts. But I also think that it's a pretty lame excuse, if we're being completely honest. It's not to say that it's not a normal thing, but it isn't unheard of that fighters will turn around with that same exact timeline from a big win with a short notice opportunity that comes up in a very quick amount of time. Let's take a look at Kyle's Fighting Nerds teammate, who is the headliner for this week's Noche UFC card, in Gian Silva. Gian Silva, notoriously, when he ended up fighting here in Denver, Colorado against Drew Dober, that was on a 2-week turnaround. So, and he went out there and he dominated the fight, mind you. Loved Drew to death. But that ended up being a stoppage, and that was a fight that Silva broke both of his hands in the first round. We've seen other fighters who have had that quick turnaround because of the opportunity that it granted them. Joshua Van being one of them. And he's about to go fight for a UFC title next because he turned around on all of a few days' notice to fill in for Manel Kopp and ends up having a fight of the year against Brandon Royval. So you can't tell me that that quick of a turnaround is just absolutely a guarantee that somebody's going to go lay an egg and have a poor performance. I don't buy it, because we have plenty of examples that speak otherwise. I think that in a large sense of this fight, speed kills. Nasruddin Imavov was just so much faster with his hands and with his footwork at every turn of the way with Caio Borralho. And yes, Caio has tremendous IQ, and he's a really smart guy in terms of the X's and O's and the tactical aspect of fighting. But it was just a matter of Nasruddin Imavov being one step ahead, again, as I said, at every turn of the way. Also, how much of a personal aspect, if you will, or what level of blackboard material did Imavov take it as for Caio being the guy getting the nod to be the backup? So by that, Caio got to go be the backup and gets the extra little bit of publicity and recognition from that fight week in Chicago. He also got paid to go weigh in as the backup. And then, by all things considered, was essentially being anointed as the next title challenger should he have won last Saturday. How personal did Imavov take that? How much blackboard material, if you will, was that for him to go out there and be motivated to make a statement against the guy who everybody was considering to be the next coming of a title challenger for the division? He says, okay, I see that you got some heat behind you. I see you have some steam. Let me go take that. Let me go take everything that you have been thinking that you are. I will go and snatch that from you right now. Is that the performance that 100% locks him in for a title shot? I think that is still going to be dependent on how the result of that Fluffy Hernandez and RDR fight goes. But it's hard to deny Imavov at this stage. It's really hard to deny him. Dude is so good. He says two words that appeal to the common crowd or that make people want to be excited about him, or a lot of the common folks have no idea who he is, and that's a major problem. That's why he hasn't been the guy who has been thought of the way that Caio was, because Caio is the likable guy. He was so personable. He has been such a branding element with the fighting nerds and with the glasses and with the success that the team had had prior to Saturday. Does he get the title shot next? Is that the performance that does it? You guys let me know. Hit me up on Instagram or on Threads at Comments from the Peanut Gallery and let me know, does that performance seal the next title shot for Nasruddin Imavov? Going to the co-main event, it was a bad night for the fighting nerds. Plain and simple. There's no other way around it. They're two studs who were on the card. Granted, they're not a large fight team, but they're two studs on the card who were still undefeated in the UFC in Mauricio Hufi and Caio Borralho, both in the co-main and main event slots, going up against a guy who was in Imavov Dagestani by way of France, and then Benoit Saint-Denis, a Frenchman. It was a good night for France in those two matchups. It was a bad night for the fighting nerds. Benoit Saint-Denis is a brute. And I'm not going to lie, he surprised me in this fight. I thought that the speed was going to be a major difference for Hufi in this fight. That big kick, though, that BSD threw in the opening sequence, it didn't even land flush, but it was just a thud that really kind of shook up Hufi to a point where he didn't really ever get his rhythm back. And I don't want to necessarily say that he was like rocked or that it flashed him, but it definitely it gave him enough of an attention call, if you will, that he never really started to get into a flow or establish his timing, his rhythm, and the flow of which he likes to actually fight. BSD did absolutely everything that he needed to do in a matchup against a striker who likes to be devastating at range, who likes to use the speed the way that he does. He made it a grimy fight, and he was ultimately able to choke out BSD. Excuse me, ultimately able to choke out Hoofy. And I think that this was a big win for Benoit, because the last time that he fought in France, it was against Moicano, and that definitely did not go well for him. More on the French crew later. Modestas Bukauskas, I think that he's a great story right now. If you don't, or if you're not familiar with Modestas, he's a guy who had an earlier run in the UFC, suffered some losses, had a major injury that he was dealt due to an oblique kick to the knee at the hands of Khalil Roundtree Jr. Goes back down to the regional scene, cleans up on some titles, gets his opportunity to get back to the UFC, and has been on a tear ever since. This last weekend, he fought the Bear Jew Paul Craig, and Paul Craig, I love the body of work overall collectively that he's had. I mean, it's not like Paul Craig was ever a threat for the title, or he was never going to be somebody based off of his skill set. I've said it all along. I like Paul Craig because he has been as much of a one-trick pony or as much of a throwback to a yesteryear fighter as we've had in quite some time, who has been able to have high-level wins. His striking has never been on par with the tops of his division, despite having, even at times, a single-digit number next to his name, I believe. It's always been his jiu-jitsu. It's always been his triangle specifically. He tried to pull guard and tried to go for the Hail Mary in this matchup against Modestas, and ended up getting sent to the Shadow Realm again. He put his gloves in the center of the octagon and walked away. I salute the Scots' brave heart warrior spirit, but there is only a certain amount of times that the lights can get shut off. And I appreciate the fact that he knows that this was a right time to walk away. No one will ever be able to take away the fact that he has finishes against the current champion, Magomed Ankalaev, as well as the former champion, Jamal Hill. Speaking of another guy who had a detour from the UFC and has been successful ever since he's made his return, let's talk about Mason Jones for a second. Mason Jones, in his first run with the UFC, went 1-2-1, went back to Cage Warriors, went on a run, gets a nod back into the UFC, and now he's 2-0 since being back in the UFC. He had that win against Jeremy Stephens on that UFC Des Moines fight night card a few weeks back, or a couple of months ago, I should say. And then this last week, he had a highlight reel finish against Balaji Oki. That puts him on a 6-fight win streak right now. And I think that this is a kid that is putting some steam together, and it's always going to be tough to be able to break through in the ranks at 155. But I think that we're starting to see a kid who got into the UFC young, had to deal with a little bit of adversity once he finally got signed. Mind you, those 2 losses in that 1-2-1 run that he had with the UFC, those are the only 2 losses that he's ever had through his whole career. And I think that sometimes with some of these guys who get to the UFC really early, and we have local examples that we could point to as well, then they don't get re-signed after the contract. It's not that he got cut. He just fought out that first 4-fight deal and they didn't re-sign him. Then they see, oh, wait, this can all go away. And then it's just like a light that gets lit underneath them. And then the rest is history. They go on this crazy run, tearing through their local and the regional scene, get themselves back into the UFC, and then they go on and they really start to make their mark upon their respective divisions. That could be very well what we're seeing from Mason Jones. Overall, just to round it up for the French crew, it was a good day. You had Gomez also getting a win, Sola and C all winning. It was a clean sweep for those frog eaters. You had Quale Fernandez getting possibly the easiest paycheck that he will ever see as a fighter on the UFC roster. He fought a short notice replacement, Harry Hardwick, who looked less competent than Phil Brooks. And if you don't know the name Phil Brooks or who Phil Brooks is, just do yourself the credit or do yourself the favor and Google it for a second. Moving along from that, Sam Patterson, man, that kid is an absolute animal. I feel like Trey Waters is a solid prospect at 170 pounds, long, lanky, smooth striker. But what he did to Trey Waters was a surgical disposal. I mean, that puts him on the radar at 170 pounds. The fight that he had against Danny Barlow was one that I feel like really kind of made me want to pay attention to him, because if you remember that fight, that was in the Apex, and I believe pretty positive it was in the Apex, one way or the other. You could very certainly hear Barlow's corner pretty clearly on a hot mic. You hear Barlow's corner saying, "Oh, he's scared, Danny." And then you see Patterson just basically have a light fire underneath him, and he goes on a furious flurry of punches that just ends up flatlining and putting Danny Barlow to a place where time doesn't exist for a few minutes. So I think that initial fight from him, that made me want to pay attention. And then this last fight, seeing the way that he went out there and just got after Trey Waters. Oh no, he's somebody that you should pay attention to at 170 pounds. Again, a lot of these young prospects, they're knocking on the door. They're knocking on the door and they're ready to make a name for themselves. And I also want to give a shout out to the homegirl, Sam Hughes. She went out there and beat another hyped up prospect. Sam Page finished Shauna Bannon. She got her with a rear naked choke in the second round. Now, what I want to say about Sam is she's another one out there who has earned absolutely everything that she's gotten in the UFC. She is, in relation to a lot of her peers, and I don't mean for this to come off in a disrespectful fashion, but this more or less highlights her grit, her ability to manage certain scenarios and to mix up the arts. But she's not an elite striker. She's not an elite grappler. But she has incredible toughness. She has arguably some of the best conditioning in the entire division. She was a steeplechase competitor. And she has continually developed those finer tuned aspects of the actual tactical elements of fighting, to where now she is able to figure out those finishes. She is able to go out there and choke out a jiu-jitsu girl in Bannon. She is able to go out there and take on some of these prospects who, on paper, and you know what the matchups or what the matchmakers are trying to do by them, she's going out there and defying the odds as the underdog in so many of these occasions, and she is just winning as an underdog time after time, and I love to see it. Shout out to you, Sam Page. Last night on the Contender Series, you had 4 of 5 winners getting contracts, and in a rare occurrence, you had one fighter who lost also get a contract. Steven Asplund, the heavyweight winner that was in the main event, also a veteran of the LFA. You know, he had quite the interesting post-fight interview with Laura Sanko, saying that he would basically do anything for a Klondike bar with Dana White to be able to get that contract. Yeah. He was on some real Rex Ryan type of requests. If you guys are football fans, you'll know exactly kind of what I'm referencing here. Darian Douglas, another LFA veteran, he had a quick knockout in the first round inside of 40 seconds against Cam Teague. Now that puts Cam Teague at 9-2. Unfortunately for Cam Teague, His only losses have been on the Contender Series. He wins everywhere else, but has fell short a couple of times there. Hopefully he gets the opportunity to come back at a future date, goes back down to the regional scene, picks up a couple more wins in the process. Next guy who picked up contracts, Samuel Sanchez. Now, Chasen Blair, his opponent, his warm-up video from the back, that pretty much went viral for all the wrong reasons across social media and a lot of MMA pages last night. His coach was holding focus mitts and he was like standing on a bench, or like standing about 1.5 feet taller, and he's swinging way up in the air. And I've never really seen this method. I've never really seen, or I'd like to know what the purpose behind them doing that in that fashion was. My exception would be if you're a really short guy and you're fighting someone who is, significantly taller than you, for example. These guys were the same height. And he's over here throwing hooks at the air 3 feet above his head, looking like he's popping bubbles out of the sky. No wonder why he got knocked out right away in the first round. If you go to the UFC video or on the Contender Series social media or the Instagram comments thread, you'll see a large portion of comments that said incoming knockout. So a lot of people thought the same way. Like, what is this warm-up? Like, this is not going to go well for this guy. And then opening up the card, you had Carol Foro taking on Chanel Dyer. Both of these ladies got contracts. Shout out to my boy Luigi Vendramini. He was in the corner of Carol, and it's good to see Luigi back in the mix of, or at least being on the radar with the guys in the UFC. He himself, since he's been out of the Crown Jewel promotion, has picked up nothing but finishes and victories. So hopefully he gets an opportunity soon. That wraps up the UFC preview right there for us, folks. Moving along to this weekend's preview. Real quick, just want to touch on the LFA card. It's back in Mystic Lake this week. You have U.S. Olympic gold medalist Gable Steveson making his much anticipated debut. I think we're all pretty much of the understanding that Gable is absolutely the favorite on paper for this match. But I mean, given his wrestling credentials, it's absolutely understandable that he is going to be the favorite in a large portion of any early matchup. However, what we don't know is how is Gable going to react to getting hit. I will only give you this counter example in relation to some of the other high-level wrestlers, because for every Daniel Cormier, Mark Coleman, those guys of the world who were Olympian-level wrestlers who went on to have Dan Henderson's, those guys who had high degrees of success, you also have somebody like Pat Downey, who, as top of the food chart in terms of wrestling in the American scene as you could possibly be, but was made to look basically, like a jobber in Bellator against a journeyman. He could not take being hit, and he had no mechanics in relation to striking and wasn't able to deal with that level of adversity. I'm a big Pat Downey fan. I love Pat Downey, but MMA was absolutely not his thing. He could not take getting hit. So that's going to be a big deal that we have to see from Gable Steveson. And I'll even counter that. Hey, Brock Lesnar won a UFC championship, and Brock Lesnar hated getting hit. You could see it in any single fight that he was in. He was not a fan anytime that you started to put the heat on him, whether that was Kane, Shane Carwin, he just happened to be able to outlast it. Alistair Overeem, kicking him in the gut after he had a lot of it removed from diverticulitis, all of those things. I digress. Long-winded rant. We have the Noche UFC preview for this weekend. Now, this card ended up being a fight night. This was not a pay-per-view. This was originally scheduled to be down in Mexico, but the stadium in Guadalajara was not ready in time. So this ends up being pushed to Texas and no longer a pay-per-view. I think that in some senses kind of took the wind out of the sails for the UFC, or at least in relation to how Dana might have put his energy for promotion for events this weekend. And we're going to get into more of that. But there are a lot of great matchups on this card, despite what some of the criticisms have been. And I also believe that there has been a significant lack of promotion for this weekend show. In the main event, you have a featherweight fight between Diego Lopes taking on Silva. Now, this has the opportunity to steal that Fight of the Year award from Brandon Royval and Josh Van. I don't see this fight going the distance. I really don't. I think that Diego 100% has the power to be able to put Silva out, but I also believe that Silva's just a different animal. I think that some of what Diego does, Diego works in a very linear fashion. He's kind of a blitzer and a sprinter. Silva has power being able to work off of his back foot, the way that he can mix off angle strikes. His elbow game is nasty. There is probably a high probability. Wow, that was a terrible way of phrasing that, Jordan. But there's a high likelihood that there's a car crash effect that's produced this weekend of Diego Lopes coming in and just essentially on one of his blitzes running into either a big punch or an elbow from Silva. That would be my prediction if you're asking for one. In the co-main event, we had a short notice shakeup. You had Rob Font. He was originally scheduled to face Raul Rosas Jr., now taking on David Martinez. This is a massive jump up in opportunity for David Martinez. David Martinez, only one fight into his UFC run, now has the opportunity to face the number 9 ranked guy in the division. That has its pros and its cons, right? Because that's a very significant step up in competition and somebody who has just fought the who's who. Now, does Rob Font have some holes in his game? Absolutely. And is David Martinez a bright prospect at 12-1? Certainly. But I think that Rob Font is still has enough left in the tank. He is still that skilled and well-rounded of a veteran to where he's seen David Martinez's before. David Martinez has not seen a Rob Font yet, if that makes sense. Following from that, you have a fight in the lightweight division in that feature slot between Jared Gooden and Rafa Garcia. A couple of veterans who not really a lot of flash between their style, but they're very tough, gritty. They're grinders. And you have somebody like Gordon who has been figuring out ways to finish fights recently. On the counter to that, even though this is a fight here in the States, being that it's on a Noche card, as we saw in Rafa's last fight that was down in Mexico City, Jared Gordon might have to finish him in this fight. Just going to leave that out there. Following that, you have a middleweight fight between Kelvin Gastelum and Dustin Stoltzfus. Now, side piece from the fight itself. Did you guys see the picture that Henry Cejudo posted with Kelvin Gastelum a couple of days ago? Henry Cejudo looks like he's fatter than Kelvin Gastelum at this stage. Kelvin Gastelum is a guy who, if he doesn't have a good showing in this fight, man, it's got to be time. He's had flashes ever since he lost that title fight with Izzy a few years back, but there's been so many blunders from Kelvin, whether it be at the scale to just uninspired performances, uninspired fights where he's just gone out there and laid an egg. Significant weight misses, as mentioned. I question what his motivation is at times, other than just the paycheck. And is the damage at that point, is it still worth it? I don't know. What are the people around you saying? But this is 100% a winnable fight. If it is a day where Dustin Stoltzfus is even remotely competitive with Kelvin Gastelum, then Kelvin, that means that you should be out. You should walk away, my man. And I know by time, you're still sitting with what many would consider time on the clock in your 30s where you are. However, I look to it of the time that you've been in the UFC, your tenure. The youngest ever UFC or the Ultimate Fighter champion back when the time was back when you were on that season with John Jones against Chael. And you were in the running to be on a season even earlier than that. So you were already at that level of fighting prior to 21. You just couldn't be a castmate on the show due to the alcohol element. You've been fighting at a high level for a long time. What's your level of inspiration to want to continue? Because it's not reflected in any of the performances or the preparation or what you've displayed on the scale or anything to that effect. I think that the next fight following that, though, is one that has the opportunity to steal some eyes. You have two veterans who have fought so much of the landscape across the division, bring a breadth of experience between the two of them that I think you're going to see a high-level human chess match with a very violent outcome. You have Alexander Hernandez fresh off of a big victory against Chase Hooper, where he had that highlight reel knockout just a couple of weeks ago, taking on Diego Ferreira. If Alex is able to get into a rhythm early, he's a tough fight for anybody. Plain and simple. And then now this being a Noche card, and this is back home down there in Texas for Alex, even though he trains out here in Denver and lives in Denver now. This is back down in Texas. This is home for him. This is as much of a home game as you could possibly be for the Great Ape. I think that he rides off of that energy, and he's going to go out there and he is going to try to put Diego Ferreira's head into orbit. Boom or bust. Another couple of fights to talk about on the card. You have what I think is going to be an interesting matchup to see how Tatiana Suarez bounces back against a high-level competitor in Amanda Lemisch in the women's 115-pound division. You also have friend of the program, another favorite from the local side of things, a guy who got to the UFC undefeated and had some of the most nasty finishes on the local and the regional scene. He's looking to bounce back after his UFC debut. You have Luis Grim-Gurley taking on Jesus Aguilar on this card. I think that Jesus is a really talented fighter, but I think that Luis is so much more violent. Luis made his debut against a very tough opponent. Styles make fights, right? That's something that you've heard me say countless times on this program throughout the years. Ode Osborne dimensionally is a really tough guy to prepare for in the flyweight division, as tall as he is. And Luis was winning that fight until he got caught. I think that mistake doesn't happen in this matchup. And I think that you see Luis Grim-Gurley go out there, get his hand raised, and potentially go out there and get a bonus with a finish on this undercard. You have a middleweight matchup between Zach Reese. Zach Reese has been incredibly active. Lots to talk about on that one. We've kind of hit on it before about, growth and actual improving your game versus always being in fight camp. But he's also facing another guy who has been really active, but a little bit more on him later, in old dumbass, Cedric S. Dumas. Another fight that I think that you have to keep your eyes on the prelims before we get this out of here and move on to the next segment. You have a matchup between Dusko Todorovic and Jose Medina. I think that Jose Medina is he's not the most talented guy in the division. Dusko isn't exactly a world beater, but Dusko does have highlight producing capabilities. I think that this is a tailor fit matchup for Dusko to go out there and potentially earn himself consideration for a bonus on a card that you're going to see a considerable amount of eyes for. Moving along from that, this is where the internal controversy with the UFC, with TKO, with Zuffa Boxing, with all these elements, and the centerpiece of it being Dana White. this weekend you have Canelo Crawford going down, and the resources that have been put into that card in relation to the Noche card have drawn the ire of a lot of fans, and there's been some considerable backlash from people out there. Honestly, people aren't wrong to be upset. Why is the UFC doing embedded for this week's Canelo Crawford card and not doing embedded for Lopes Silva? Why is boxing being forced down UFC fans' throats through their distribution channels? Dan, if you want to have your boxing run, then create those distribution channels, create those socials for that. This is a growing problem that many hardcore fans are having with the UFC, in that they're not really catering to their true base anymore. They're going on these reaches for some of these additional or adjacent fan bases because they know that us 12 to 15% of the degenerates of the fan bunch are going to watch no matter what. We're probably going to complain like we are right now, but we're still watching or we're still partaking. My issue is that they're using the size and the reach of the UFC social channels and platforms to promote their other shows and events, and the fighters in the UFC are suffering because of it. Just like I said, there is no embedded for this week for the Noche card, which Noche was supposed to be a big deal. You have the embedded, the day-by-day video for the boxing fight. I don't care about Dana's bull. I don't care about the whiskey or the seltzer water activations. I don't care about the race car. I don't care about Power Slap. I want to see UFC content when I go to UFC channels. I don't want to go to the UFC YouTube channel and the first video that I see this morning is the newest episode of the Canelo Crawford embedded. I said it a few weeks ago and I will say it again. The UFC is no longer under any pressure or incentive to build stars or to do anything other than fill event quotas to make their money. Especially that new $7.7 billion deal that is inked. That is in place. In general, a certain level of fatigue is going to hit anybody. 20 plus years at the helm for Dana White seems to be taking its toll now. For as great of an advocate and a promoter for the sport as he was, and for the UFC as he was for even as recently as a couple of years ago, I think is to our detriment right now. He doesn't have the same week in and week out fire the way that he once did. He has these new passion projects that he has high energy for, that he is putting a lot of time, effort, and money into. If this were yesteryear, where there was a boxing card who is trying to go head to head on a premier event weekend against the UFC, Dana would have been licking his chops, standing his ground, ready to go toe-to-toe with them, and ready to not just go toe-to-toe, but do everything to absolutely crush them. If you remember a couple of years back, how excited he was in the post-fight press conference talking about when they brought up how the boxing show that night, if I'm mistaken, it might have been a Canelo card, even for that matter, that start had to be delayed because there was still so many eyes and so much attention on the UFC card that night. That was the killer Dana for MMA. That was the killer that Dana had in him for the UFC and for wanting to crush the competition. Now he's the promoter of it. That in itself is a concern. But just like that, folks, we're going to move along to our final segment of the afternoon. We're going to go 3 rounds. Got my man Danny Bailey behind the boards holding it down for me. First round. Yeah.
Alrighty, Jordan. First round video has been released of, excuse my pronunciation, Losene Keita. Keita?
I'll give it to you.
All right. Begging for Patricio Pitbull to still take the fight despite missing weight prior to the bout cancellation. What are your thoughts?
I support Pitbull for not taking the fight. He did it to himself, and he robbed somebody else of the opportunity to go out there on a major card and a showcase platform to make their way within the UFC, or to somebody on the roster in existence. He was a double champion of a high-level regional promotion in Octagon, and he couldn't have fumbled this opportunity any worse. He was begging for Pitbull to take the fight, saying, "Oh, it's just 1 kilo. It's just 1 kilo. I've stopped sweating." And Pitbull telling him, like, "No, it's not my problem. You did this. I don't care if it's 1 kilo. You are the person, like, you chose this. You signed that you were going to make 146 flush. You are not. I don't care that you're not sweating anymore." And keep in mind, he still had an hour and a half left as far as a window to go and cut that final 3. He was just choosing not to. And yeah, he said that he went dry, couldn't sweat anymore. Well, sometimes that is the case. That's as much as you can get off. But he was also pretty energetic and pretty, I guess lively, for lack of a better word, for someone who allegedly couldn't cut any more weight. Again, it's not all the time to say that it's a universal situation, but usually if you're on that brink of you absolutely cannot cut anymore, you're hurting. You're not lively. You're not sitting there begging for a handout from somebody in that sense. You have signs that you are struggling. And he didn't appear to have those signs of visible struggle and physical distress of someone who was completely tapped out for cutting. That also being, that being said, I don't understand a lot of MMA fans out there. There are people that are blasting Pitbull for not taking the fight. Pitbull is scared. Pitbull could have taken the fight. He could have taken it on short notice, and he would have been in good favor for the UFC. Shut up, Momo. There is no favors for the UFC. It's a professional fight at a contracted weight. Pitbull right now at this stage of his career, in his later 30s, is 1-1 in the UFC. He's already in this matchup giving up a considerable disadvantage when it comes to the youth, the athleticism. This kid was bigger, faster, stronger. And then you want to give a whole 3 pounds of difference? That 3 pounds is the cut. That is the rough part. That is the suffering. So if you are asking for that to be forgiven, no, I do not blame Pitbull in the slightest for not rewarding this kid for going out there and giving him the opportunity. No, you're not going to be rewarded for your unprofessionalism on my watch or on my dime. Not happening.
Some questions about the efficacy of the Athletic Commission in China have been brought up after multiple negative stories from the event. Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised at the commission necessarily being faulty. It's China. I am surprised more so in the UFC and some of the handling of the events from their side of things. Kiefer Crosby has went viral for his statement saying that he wasn't provided with any sort of medical protocol following his fight where he sustained multiple injuries, including a concussion. You also had the insane debacle of the weight cut, the reported cancellation, then it was on, it was off, it was on, of the Brian Ortega fight. Brian Ortega posted on social media this week that he passed out unconscious for 30 minutes and woke up in the ER, but was still within the window to be able to show up to weigh-ins and step on the scale. So despite him being out for all of that time, that far overweight still, and the fight ends up being a catch weight, he still was allowed to fight, not only by the promotion, but by the commission. And then I also ask in all of this, what is Tiki Gozan doing for him at this stage? Yeah, that allowed him the chance to still get paid. Sure, I'll offer you that. But at what cost? At what opportunity? And this is an issue that we've spoken to before on the program, but it is something that will continue to be a thing going forward in the sport. You know who managed both Aljamain Sterling and Brian T. City Ortega? Tiki Gozan. Tiki doesn't have the largest roster share, but there are other management labels out there within the UFC where you will see situations where both A and B side of the fight are represented by the same label. Make of that what you will.
Just ahead of his fight this weekend at Noche UFC, Cedriques Dumas posted a screenshot with a bank account balance of $13.96. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I may be dating myself with this reference here, but there was a classic film from my era growing up from the legendary Jim Carrey called Liar, Liar. Stop breaking the law, asshole. This guy has been arrested more than a dozen times in less than as many years. He's got more mugshots than people would have on their MySpace top 8 friends. He's been arrested multiple times this year at that. One of them, he was found by the law while he was hiding in a dog crate. So I have zero sympathy for Cedriques Dumas in any of his sort of woes in the process. This guy is on his second contract now in the UFC, which means that, you know, he's not making great money fighting, but he's still making way better money as a fighter in the UFC than he would be able to do anyway otherwise. And that's also pointed out for the obvious with somebody like Cedriques Dumas and his criminal record. I don't know that Cedriques Dumas is putting so much of his money in a bank account either. But hey, that may just be an assumption from Cedriques having a rap sheet that is a mile long. You know, we're Mile High Sports, but he's got a rap sheet that is a mile long. That is not an exaggeration. Look at how many times the man has been arrested. I will never hesitate to continue to just take digs at him, you know, as much as possible. The guy has fought multiple friends and teammates of mine. The way that he has acted in interviews and all of that, whether to those guys or to his other opponents in the process. No, and the nature of his offenses, he has a crime for an assault on a school property where he brought a weapon. He has multiple crimes where he's beaten women. He has protection order violations. That guy is scum of the earth. So I hope that Zach Reese goes out there and puts him on a highlight reel. That is very few fighters that you will ever hear me wish that they lose. But Cedriques Dumbass is one of them. Just like that, though, folks, we are all out of time. Thank you all so much for supporting us here with Original Combat Sports Programming. We want to thank you so much for tuning in each and every week. Let us know what you think. You can hit us up on social media. Hit me directly on Instagram or on Threads at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. If you have any big heaters for the weekend, whether it be with Noche or with the Canelo Crawford card, let me know. Next week, we'll be back with you. We're going to be talking with former PFL champion Ray Cooper III. Stick around, or excuse me, that wraps it up for us this week. I want to give a big thank you to Danny Bailey holding it down for me each and every week. This is the MMA Plug presented to you by Mile High Sports at the number 38, presented to you by Volvo.